So welcome to the Industry 4.0 Club. This is our weekly Fireside chat, and we're really excited today to be speaking with Kathy Miller. Just before we get into our conversation with Kathy, just want to talk a minute about the club. We're on a mission to advance the evolution towards Industry 4.0. We do this by engaging globally diverse thought leaders in a safe and inclusive space to ask questions and share insights. Wednesdays, as today, as we typically host our weekly Fireside chat. So my name is Mike Ungar. I'm currently a Focal Point business coach. I retired from Michelin after 35 years of working in continuous improvement, operations, finance, and HR. Joining me today is my co-host, Daniel Gottfried. Daniel, would you please introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Nice to be here as well. My name is Daniel Gottfried. I'm the co-founder of Highrise AI. I'm a technologist that's worked in the bleeding edge technology world, in the world of AR, VR, IoT, and automation. And it's great to be here today as well.
Thanks, Daniel. So just some quick housekeeping. We really want to engage the audience, so please feel free to put your comments into the comment box on LinkedIn Live, and we'll try to get those questions and comments to Kathy. You can also follow our club on industry4.0club.com, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So today we're thrilled to welcome and have a chance to speak with Kathy Miller. Kathy is an experienced senior operations executive that has led successful transformations of business in the aerospace, automotive, and various industrial markets. She's led global operations of in excess of $3 billion. She's been responsible for profit and loss statements and served as a global leader for the lean enterprise, quality, strategy deployment, industrial design, and supply chain functions. She has a passion for developing organizational cultures based on inclusivity, trust, continuous improvement, and accountability. Today, Kathy is a business advisor and coach with a passion for advancing women in manufacturing. So welcome, Kathy. We're glad that you could spend the next hour with us. So just to get started, I noticed that you have your bachelor's in industrial engineering. How did you what made you decide to choose that way back when as your major and as you got into school?
Oh, that's a great question, Mike. And thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm just going to shoot straight with you. It was not my first choice of a career. As a matter of fact, I really hadn't heard of it when I was coming out of high school. When I was talking to my dad and trying to decide where I wanted to go to college, I first wanted to be a psychologist. And my dad said, no, can't be a psychologist. You're going to need a PhD. You're going to come out of school with $100,000 in debt, and it's going to take you forever to pay it back. And I said, okay, how about a lawyer? And he said, no. And I said, how come? He's like, because you're watching the paper chase. I used to sell law books. It's not all like you see on TV. So I don't think you would like it as much as you think you would. And I said, okay, Dad, then, what's your recommendation? And he said, well, why don't you go into engineering? And I didn't really know a lot about, manufacturing or engineering at the time. And I got a pamphlet in the mail from GMI, which is now Kettering. And he had heard of the school and had me dig it out of the trash and apply there. And it actually ended up being a great opportunity for me because I was able to come out of school, work 6 months a year at a General Motors plant, and come out of school with a relatively small amount of debt and employment, which was his motivation, right? That I would be able to take care of myself and find gainful employment where I could contribute. So it was my third choice, but at the end of the day, I'm really a people and process oriented person. So it ended up being a great choice.
Oh, that's great. And so you ended up enjoying it, I guess. And, when you come out of school as an industrial engineer, right, you have some choices you can make. There's industrial engineering in manufacturing,
Mhm.
and then there's also industrial engineering outside of manufacturing. What got you into manufacturing?
So I started as a co-op student working in the vehicle assembly plant. So I worked in industrial engineering for a number of stints before I even graduated from college. And about a month after I graduated from Kettering or GMI, the plant that I was working at closed down. And I got transferred to Delphi Delco Electronics. And at that point, I switched over to industrial engineering for product design. So I went into, advanced technologies, head up displays, navigation systems, those sorts of things to help with the ergonomic aspect of product design. And I did that for several years with a stint of marketing in between. And I got with a mentor who asked me, did I want to stay in engineering and continue to go the technical path with, designing products and helping launch those, or did I want to go back to the factory? And there was a certain part of me that really missed the floor. And so I went back as a superintendent, making pressure sensors. So I think just that, how do I want to say it? That piece of nostalgia, that piece of me, that my first professional job was in a vehicle assembly plant, was just captured a part of my heart. And I wanted to go back to being with the people and the processes in manufacturing. And so I switched over there and have stayed in and around it ever since.
Wow, that's great. Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, Kathy, it's very interesting actually. I could really empathize with this, that you mentioned that you wanted to first go into the world of psychology,
Mhm.
because it really seems now that your role involves immense empathy for the humans and the processes, behind these plants. So do you feel you've satisfied that first, need of yours, the first, world that you want to live in?
I really do, right? Because manufacturing is so much about people and processes. And spoiler alert, I still had that on my bucket list. And so last year, I actually went back to the University of Pennsylvania and got my master's in applied positive psychology. So I'm using it in this new Kathy 2.0 phase of my career. And, it was great because it really reinforced a lot of the leadership principles that I adopted and that were natural to me. But now it gives me the science and the evidence behind why some of those things are so effective. And I'm using that, with my coaching clients and individuals and companies to help them flourish as well. So it was always there. And I really just needed to go back to school and get that piece of paper. It was really important to me. So I did. Even at this advanced stage, I found it immensely valuable.
Congratulations. You got, you started off where, and you ended up where you wanted to be. There you go.
No, that's fantastic. So I want to come back to your manufacturing experience for a little bit.
Mhm.
What are a couple pivotal moments for you in manufacturing that really kind of helped to frame, who you became later in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. I think the most pivotal moment, and there's been so many moments through the years, some positive, some not so positive, but the very first impactful moment that of significance was when we were at the assembly plant and it was closing down after 50 years of operation. The entire organization followed the last car down the line. And it was a significant emotional event. So here you had people who had grown up in a very conventional command and control, very dominant, stereotypical manufacturing environment, following this last car down the line. So much insecurity about what the future held for them, so much emotion around, the end of an era, and, these big burly people who were, loud and really commanding of attention were reduced to tears. And I remember following that car down the line and thinking to myself that I really couldn't depend on a company to ever take care of me. I know that's maybe a terrible thing to say, but I remember when I got hired at GM, and my parents were so excited. They thought I'd won the lottery of lifetime employment. And going through that and seeing how people really struggled, some people to really pick up the pieces after that plant went down, was really a significant emotional event for me, and really taught me early on that I had to continue to develop my skills. I had to continue to learn and contribute, that I had to be responsible for my own career and the trajectory of it. So that was, I would say, the very first real pivotal moment in my career.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking, I think, because it's interesting to think about the evolution. When we joined, we're probably similar in generation. When we joined, we thought about careers for life. And I think today, most folks don't, or don't, or companies for life, if you will. Most folks don't today. And it's a really interesting thing. And, it's kind of like when in your career do you make that shift? For a lot of folks, it was in the 2008 recession, where they realized that, holy cow, it's a pretty significant economic downturn. I can't depend on a company. For other companies, or others, if you remember, when I really go back and date myself, Daniel, it was like when Enron, remember when Enron failed, and all of a sudden everybody's pensions were no longer available to them. So there's a lot of events, and some of them are, like you said, personal, where just down to a factory, and some of them are more societal, if you will. So that's quite interesting.
Another real pivotal moment for me was, I stayed in automotive. I stayed with General Motors. I moved to Delco Electronics, who was still part of General Motors at that time. And, eventually they spun off into, and I was in the components division with Delphi. And at that time, I was the manufacturing superintendent. I got called in. I was told I was going to be going to the lean team. And I was actually really upset about it, because I thought I was doing a good job and I didn't understand why I was being sidelined. And they said, no. There's going to be no plan B. We're going to do lean manufacturing. We're taking, some of our young and bright talent and getting them immersed in lean manufacturing. And so we want you to learn it, to be able to teach it. And we're going to be promoting people who really adopt it. So it turned out to be great. And I was able to learn from some of the early practitioners of lean, the people who wrote the book, Jim Womack and Rick Harris and John Shook, and that whole group of people. That was so pivotal. And so we embarked on a lean transformation. I did get promoted to plant manager. We embarked on a lean transformation, and really worked hard to develop a lean enterprise in the plants that I was managing. And we were recognized with the Shingo Award. So that was very, very exciting and very pivotal, because, when you think about it, this was about 9 months before Delphi went Chapter 11. And so you have to imagine the immense pressure on the operations from a cost standpoint and a production standpoint. And no matter how good the plant got, it was really difficult to get internal recognition, right? Because of just the constant pressure to do better. So when we were recognized as really having made significant business improvements from the Shingo Academy, it was so important. It was so important for the team to get recognition for all the hard work and all of the great things, that had been done. So that was a pivotal moment as well, just reinforcing in my mind how important it is to recognize people for their contributions in spite of the tremendous, financial pressures and things that are going on. It's still important to treat people well and, recognize when they are contributing to the business.
Yeah. Great, Daniel.
Kathy, yeah, I'm just to catch that. Would you be able to share a few before and after experience that you've had before the lean and after the lean transformation, specifically when you first were introduced to that world?
So you mean in terms of the plant
Yeah.
itself? Yeah. So one of the key things that I learned is that you can actually get better results with less people. And and you can get more parts with less people if you're spending time on less waste. And I remember Rick Harris telling us that, and it just seems so counterintuitive. But when we put in the material flow, right? So every operator wasn't going out and getting their own material, and we made sure that all of their people's workstations were set up for the least amount of waste. It was incredible. And what was also incredible was that we were able to take fork trucks out of factories, right? And tug material through with 2 or 3 routes through million square feet of floor space. And nobody thought that was possible because, fork trucks were really prolific. So those were some of the types of things that we experienced. And you almost have to experience them firsthand to really believe that it's possible, to run a size operation like that and get more productivity, more pieces out, with less people, and be able to move equipment through, not equipment, but the parts and the material through such a great amount of floor space without fork trucks in big batches. Is that what you mean, or are you looking
Yeah.
for
That's perfect. Like, just, you go into this world where you're like, you thought it was sort of like you're being cast aside. You come out, obviously, different person, and then you're doing all of these, mad science projects around the plant, I assume, until they worked. You're only crazy until they work. And then obviously you have this, I assume, had this massive following behind you, being like, what can we do next? Sort of the excitement must have been brewing.
The energy was palpable when we started, getting going. It was, people were a little bit incredulous at first that it would work in our environment. I've been in over 300 plants worldwide, and every time I go in, we get that's great, Kathy, but we're unique and special because of XYZ, and it won't work here. I get that 100% of the time when I go in with a new with a new factory. It's just how long it takes before the leader or someone on the team says that. So
Over under.
it was really great. And people doubted that it could be done in a UAW environment. There was a lot of that going on, and we were able to debunk that as well. And there were some incredible team members who really helped us succeed and get to, the next level of performance.
So let's talk about as well. So you had your first experience and it went really well, and it had this whole team behind you. Like, oh, what can we do next? The state of like you're saying, manufacturing plants and how they're set up. You go into one, you go into the other. It's a different world. They're very fragmented. So do you find that there's like best practices regardless that sort of like supersede any manufacturing plant?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The foundations and the principles I've found work universally. It's just the how that has to be different to, adapt to the volume or the types of parts you're making. But it's all built on respect for people and having people help solve the problems, that they have in their organization. And then all the principles apply, even the advanced ones. It's just a matter of how you get there and are able to implement them with the tools that are available.
Amazing.
So if we follow that a little bit further, then can you give us 2 or 3 culture points that you believe are essential for success in any organization?
Absolutely. First of all, the leader has to be visible and authentic. Okay. You can't really delegate your leadership throughout the plant. So, the more responsibility you get, you're in a lot more meetings, you have a lot more reports to report out on and those sorts of things. But you have to make time to get to the workplace and have good connectivity with the people that you operate with. So for instance, there were times where I had 8 to 10,000 people reporting to me through the various layers in the organization. And clearly I couldn't know 10,000 people one-on-one. But what I did try to do was spend a lot of time on the floor in my various operations. And when I had an opportunity to interact with somebody, I made sure that I developed a high quality connection with them, right? Where I was listening to what they were saying intently, hearing what they were saying, and being very honest and truthful about what I knew about the situation they were sharing with me, or just how I felt about something they personally shared with me. So I think it's really important because it establishes trust between you and the members of your team. And they're a little bit more willing to take risks and go with you on what you're trying to do if they feel like they know who you truly are and what you truly believe in. So the first one is visible and authentic leadership. I think the second thing is really creating that inclusive environment where you're involving everybody in problem solving. The days of uh, all problems being solved in a conference room and relegated to the engineering and management team, I think are really outdated because it's hard to tell what people are experiencing unless you're really there with them. And they know the equipment, they know the processes, they know their challenges. So it's very important to create an environment and give people tools, whether that's training or resources, to be able to contribute to solving issues. And along with that is creating a culture that includes psychological safety, where people feel that they can bring anything up without fear of repercussion and contribute and not be afraid to fail. I always felt that it was important to encourage people to try. And so long as safety and quality were not compromised, it was okay if an experiment didn't work out. It was just an opportunity and a lesson learned to share with other people and to try a new direction. If you're in a culture where it's punitive when things don't work out perfectly, then people aren't going to try as hard and you're not going to have progress accelerate at a rate that you could.
Oh, that's excellent. Those are three really, really strong culture points. And I appreciate you sharing those, especially I know because they come from your experience, probably from successes and maybe some failures as well.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about maybe some moments that maybe weren't where you question yourself, was there ever a time in your manufacturing career where you thought, oh my gosh, why am I in manufacturing?
Mm-hmm. There was probably a time every single day that I thought that, if the truth be known. There's no shortage of challenges in manufacturing, and I'm a planner, right? And over time, I came to, just see how long I could go in the day before some unexpected challenge arose that I had to handle. But I think everybody feels that way about their career, right? Whether you're manufacturing or medical or the service industry, right? Everybody has difficulties and challenges in their jobs. So, yes, I definitely thought of that. There were days when I went into some settings where I thought, I could have picked something a little bit more glamorous, than this hard hat and these steel-toed shoes and these gloves and, all the PPE equipment. But, when I reframe the experiences that I've had, I really look at this career with gratitude. Basically, everything I have in my life is because of manufacturing, right? And being able to contribute in that environment. And there's just something very real about being able to add value to the world and make the world a better place. And I'm super passionate about strong manufacturing because I feel like there's very few places where people of all skill sets and educational levels, can get jobs and add values to have good living and income for their people. So I'm actually really grateful that that's how it turned out, even though I wouldn't have planned it that way at the age of 17.
No, that's wonderful. And, it's funny because when we're in it, it's much harder to see, or think about the impact we have in the future. But when you get past a few years and you look back, you go, oh my gosh, what an impact you might have had. and others had on you as well, I'm sure. So that's really neat.
Absolutely. I had so many amazing champions and role models and allies along the way.
Daniel, I kind of wanted to move over, and Kathy, to talk some about Industry 4.0, if I could, for a moment.
Mhm.
So could you have any experiences where you saw Industry 4.0 really benefit your factory? I mean, did you get into some of that before you left manufacturing as well?
Yes, absolutely. We were really starting to get into where we were getting good data from pieces of equipment. I worked in a number of different factories, and from brand new equipment to what we'll call vintage equipment. And there were so many tools that were starting to come on that would allow us to derive real-time data from the equipment. It was amazing as I went through my career how little pieces of data there were towards some of the beginning operations, right, to what was available towards the end. So that was huge, being able to have data to help you make better decisions, right, through the various tools that you had there. And we were starting to explore some of the virtual reality tools in some of the companies that I worked with, which I think are going to be so powerful for training employees and complex systems and assembly situations, versus reading on a flat sheet of paper. And then also some of the advanced manufacturing technologies are amazing, right? Where you load a part is processed, right? Where, it goes through and dimensions are chiseled, not chisels, pretty primitive way, but right. So you're cutting chips and creating dimensions, goes directly to an automatic measuring system that feeds back where the tolerances are, where, are following within the spec, where the performance is, and feeding real time. So if they need to adjust any parameters for, the next piece is being produced, it's really amazing. Some of the quality advantages that are coming out. Some of that equipment is pretty sophisticated and expensive, but I think for the long haul, the investment is going to be significant for creating competitive manufacturing, regardless of where it's done in the world.
Well, I want to touch on that for a second. You mentioned earlier that even a leaner team you might find could be a much more efficient machine together. If you come in and are able to bring these lean methodologies to a smaller team. Of course, today there's a big looming problem of not enough people to work in these plants. But do you feel that these technologies in Industry 4.0 could sort of take away a bit of that burden and allow less people to do more?
Well, absolutely. There's a lot of productivity to be had, right, through automation, assuming that you don't automate waste, right? So you want to make sure you've got your methods down and what are the key parameters that add value. So I think there definitely is productivity to be had from Industry 4.0. The piece that becomes emotional for people is they think that, their jobs are going to be replaced by technology. And the experience that I've had so far is, yes, you can do more with less, but you're still going to need people, right? There's still a long way to go before we've got a fully automated factory, particularly in mid-sized markets, right? Where some of this is not necessarily affordable to put a whole system in place, right? And people's jobs are going to evolve, and we're going to be able to take away what were more purely manual jobs, right? And make them more thinking type jobs, more where you interact and where people can work on the business, not in the business. So I think there's just tremendous opportunity to help continue to develop meaningful jobs in manufacturing as these technologies get employed.
So, so just to touch on that. So if that's the case, what are your thoughts on how we might accelerate the adoption of some of these technologies? What should companies be doing in your mind to accelerate?
Yeah, so I liken it, Mike, to the whole lean journey, right? You have to start small, right? You're not going to just go from connected operating systems in every aspect of your business overnight. And if that is your ambition, I think very few people will be able to achieve that, right? Especially as technology is evolving so quickly. So I think you start by going out and looking at the pain points in your operation and seeing what technology can help alleviate problems for the operators, for the people doing the jobs, even in offices, right? There's a lot of functions and roles that can be automated and done better in those areas. And when you find the right technology to take care of those problems, the people whose problems they're solving become advocates for it, right? And they can help spread that to other areas of the factory. But I think you start with some small things, just like you start with small Kaizen events or small scrap reduction things. And then you start to connect systems as you progress. That would be my recommendation. I wouldn't necessarily fall in love with a cool technology and try to find an application for it. I've seen that attempted several times, possibly done that myself. Not saying, for sure whether I did or not. But if you have a problem, I believe there's a lot of smart people and technologies out there that can help you solve it.
So let me touch on that as well. You come into an organization and maybe seem a bit scary. People are scared with this, what's going to happen, what change is going to happen. Obviously, you're saying start small with these small wins. How does their perception change after these small wins? Like, what is it? Is it sort of like a linear scale where you're just like, or is it sort of ramp up very, very quickly where there's much more uptake in the it's a lot quicker of an uptake as well?
So I find that there's a lot of effort until you reach that tipping point where people are just ready to go along with you wholeheartedly. At first, there's just a ton of resistance, right? I mean, especially in factories where, at least in the companies I worked at, leadership changes every 3 to 4 years, right? As
Yes.
people are moving through and onward and upward or sideways or whatever. And so, the workforces don't tend to turn over as much as the leadership does. So these workforces are very adept at waiting things out, right? Like, I can wait out this leader. I can wait out this latest fad, Kathy will move on to something soon enough. So, if I can just resist long enough. So there's a lot of inertia at first, Kathy, you don't understand. We've always done it this way. We had somebody come in with some newfangled idea 15 years ago, and this is how it failed, so it takes a lot of time. It's not linear at all. And then once you have a number of wins and people see that you are interested in their success, you are interested in the longevity of that business, and you want to create a strong competitive business so their children and their children's children could work in this business if they so chose, then they start to come along, right? They start to see the benefits. They see that you're in it for the right reasons, and they'll come along. So I've always found that it's really like pushing a boulder up a hill for a long time. And then there's a certain point where all the infrastructure and all the time you've spent investing in communicating that future vision and that sort of thing, it'll start to take hold, and then things really accelerate. That's been my experience.
Wow. I can only imagine as well, through your experience, that there's different departments have different pulls. They bring you in, oh, I want Kathy here. I want Kathy here. We got to start here and here. How do you start and navigate that? I can only imagine it's almost impossible.
Well, when I was the lean leader, right, I would always pick the area that had the most impact, right? So if everybody was rejecting you, then, you had to sort of like get in, and there was one who had said, okay, we'll give it a try. Sometimes you have to go with like the easy, least resistant. But in general, it's better to pick the area with the most impact to the business so that the results can't be denied. And then once that area starts getting some notoriety, that model value stream or that model plant, then others want a piece of that. They want that sort of performance as well. And so it shifts a little bit from a push to a pull system. But I usually tried to pick the areas with the biggest impact.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
It's yeah, I think your contrast there. Sometimes it's best to pick the one where you can be sure to get that first victory, to have a model that you can then share with others. But and you're right. The risk of that is that sometimes the you'll get the, well, that was the easy place. You obviously you can do it there, but still it's finding that right place to start and get that momentum going. It's a really good point. I wanted to, you have a long background in lean, and I wanted to ask you, do you think lean and Industry 4.0 are complementary or maybe conflictual? What's your perspective on that?
No, I think they're very complementary. Lean is about producing value with the least amount of waste. And Industry 4.0 is a lot about automating things, right? And reducing defects and having data that allows you to make great decisions and better decisions. So I think it's very complementary. My only caution in that, which I always told my teams, I always wanted to jump to automating something first, right? Is show me a manual process that works first. So you're not automating waste. You don't want something spitting out garbage faster. That is not helpful.
Yeah, it's actually harder to change also too once you automate it.
Yeah. Absolutely. But
Yeah.
no, I think the two are very synergistic.
Well, that's good. So I wanted to, so maybe we can flip gears now and talk about, you mentioned going back to school, getting your degree in psychology. I said psychology, but it is more complicated than that, I'm sure.
Applied positive psychology.
Thank you. Applied positive psychology. Excuse me for shortening that.
No, it's fine.
But you've also done a couple other things that I think are quite interesting to our audience, and I guess I'd like to get into that a little bit more in depth. So you started an organization called OPSisters. What is that?
So right now, it's a partnership between myself and Shannon Carls, the co-author of the book Steel Toes and Stilettos I just wrote. So we have started our own coaching, training, and consulting agency to work with people and individuals who want to create strong manufacturing through lean implementation and the science of human flourishing.
Yeah, so OPSisters is actually your company then.
Yes.
I got it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
And the book. So talk a little bit about the book. The book you wrote. Why did you decide to write the book?
Well, Shannon and I worked together at one point when I was a general manager, and I hired her to be my lean implementation manager on my staff and help convert what at the time was 4 plants from traditional batch manufacturing to lean manufacturing. And over the 3 years, we got some tremendous results working with our team. And she and I became very close friends through this process. And we were just talking one day and reminiscing and sort of laughing about some of the things that we had been through together that didn't seem funny at the time necessarily, and thought about our book or our story and said, you know what? We actually got some really great results. And why do we think that was? What was it? What was the combination? What were those factors that really helped us excel in converting those plants and transforming those plants? And so we said, you know what? We should take a look at that and write a book. And you know how sometimes you come up with great ideas and then you put them on the shelf and, never get back to them. She was visiting from Chicago. I was in Indianapolis. She called me the next day. I really want us to write this book. Let's call it Steel Toes and Stilettos. And within 2 months we had it outlined and, the chapters put together and that sort of thing. And we really, it's a lean transformation roadmap. It's not a book about tools. It does have an order of approach, but it has more of the, how do I want to say it? Soft skills, even though soft skills can be hard, right? In terms of how you get people to adopt these lean methodologies and tools so that they're effective and sustainable. And, quite honestly, we thought it would be a good idea to put a story out there of 2 women being successful in this very male-dominated industry. although we're not necessarily comfortable always talking about the gender issue, we try to downplay that. We do recognize that there are very few female role models in executive positions in manufacturing, or at least there were when we were growing up. And we wanted to encourage, a more diverse population going into manufacturing so that you can get the benefits of diversity of thought and more balanced leadership teams in the future.
What do you hope that a reader takes home with them after they're done finishing the book that they could bring to their world?
Yeah, it depends on the purpose of reading the book. First, you can use it, anyone can use it as a lean roadmap. We're not prescriptive about the steps, but the steps are all in there. So you can do that if you're a lean practitioner or a leader who wants to know an order of approach that works and creates sustainable change. We also wanted to serve as role models for the next generation of manufacturing leaders, regardless of gender, right? Just that whole inclusivity piece and helping people get skills and opportunities they might not have had otherwise to really excel and contribute to the business.
I think that's so important. I feel like, from my experience as well, there's a lot of voices that aren't heard that really should be. And especially on the floor, the really hardworking individuals that, like you're saying, their job sometimes is very thankless. And like you're saying, you don't, even when you're bringing transformation to a business, you're not given the credibility sometimes for the change that you bring. With that being said, what do you have any examples in the book that you feel like you're very proud of that could inspire people that are hearing us today?
Oh gosh, there's so many examples. And I'm just trying to think. There were so many people that we met, and people are so much more than their hands, right? They have hearts and heads as well. There's one example of a person, and this is not in the book, but it was really inspirational and one of the pivotal moments in my career. And I met this gentleman it was my first engagement at this new division, and we were going to a service award dinner. And this gentleman had on sweatpants and a tie and, a dress shirt, and was honoring a 40-year employee. And he stood up to speak and gave the most heartfelt, accurate, descriptive piece of gratitude for this 40-year-old or 40-year employee. And I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, I have to get to know this person, right? So I went in as the general manager and I got to know him. And, he could have very easily gotten lost in the environment, right? It was rubber manufacturing, which was when I first got there, a little bit dingy, kind of, some stalactites of rubber soot hanging from the ceiling. And I found out he was just this incredible person, had these incredible talents that we weren't using. So we gave him problem solving skills, and we gave him leadership development classes, and he became a team leader and a supervisor, and eventually, led one of the departments. So it wasn't, just like this overnight thing. And I remember when he got promoted, and I stayed out of the promotional decisions because my team had to pick their own leaders. I wrote him a note, and he wrote back this note that I still keep with me every day. And he said, and I said, thank you. I'm so proud of you. And he wrote back and said, Kathy, thank you. Before you came, the little people were just the little people. And now we feel seen and heard. And, that leadership style has really helped many of us flourish in the business. And to me, that's what it's all about. That's not in the book, but there's many stories sort of like that in the book.
Wow, that's
People are
super
incredibly
powerful.
creative when given
Wow.
the opportunity.
Of course.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
super. What about if I could touch on you mentioned being a role model for anybody, but for women as well.
Mhm.
There's lots of different people focusing on helping women get into careers that are typically male dominated today. What are some of the tips you have for women who are trying to really break through into manufacturing?
So what I would say is, first of all, give it a try, right? So many people don't even consider it as a career because they look around and they don't see a lot of females. But we do know that women can be very successful in STEM fields. And so my message is be your authentic self. You're not going to come across the roadblocks and the barriers and the inappropriate things that I did decades ago. It's not that way anymore, right? We're starting to understand inclusive cultures and appropriate cultures and those sorts of things. So it may be a very different environment than you would stereotypically think. So I think it's very important to do that. And then focus on getting results, because results win at the end of the day, regardless of your gender or whatever identity group that you affiliate with, and cultivate meaningful relationships. Most of the relationships that I had were with male allies, right? And people and coaches and mentors and people who looked into the organization and said, Kathy, I think you have something. Let me help develop you. Let me give you this experience. Let me coach you on why maybe you shouldn't wear your heart on your shirt sleeve so obviously. So I think first, give it a try, get results, and cultivate relationships with people who want to help you and give you an opportunity. They are there.
That's great. Did you ever experience what I guess we'll call the glass ceiling, where you had trouble, where you thought, because you've been able to advance, time and time again, but did you see the glass ceiling in your career? And if so, how'd you deal with that?
Um, I never really got hung up on that. I always worked for men. I never had a female boss. And I just really didn't get hung up on that fact. It wasn't that big of a factor for me, Mike, unless other people brought it up. What was more disconcerting to me is I would get promoted to a position and people would make comments that I think were well-meaning, and complimentary, like, "Oh, a female VP of ops. I've never met one of those before," right? And you're like, "Well, what am you supposed to do with that? I'm also, from Rochester, New York. Like, am I the first, VP of ops from Rochester, New York you met?" And so, you know, I hated that. I think people meant really well, but I felt like, hey, look, I've earned my seat at the table regardless of gender. So let's not bring it up. Or like, you get into these diversity conversations that you would have to have, at HR, and you'd be the only female in the room, which I generally didn't notice unless it was brought up. And they're like, okay, here's the pie chart. Let's see, we've got 12% women now, and then like, you're the token woman in the room, right? You don't want to be, but you're in the extreme minority. And so that's awkward. I actually had a situation once where I had a boss and I loved him so much. He was so great and so sincere. And we were having one of those conversations and I'm there with my all male peers. And I had just gone back to manufacturing. And so they didn't really, I had been in engineering. They didn't know me. And I'm just trying to, fit in and do my thing. And he's like, okay, today we're going to talk about our high pot diversity candidates. So let's have a discussion about them. And he puts them up on the board and my name's the first name on the list. Right. And I'm like, what do you do with that? Right. And so then, all the guys are like, oh, the golden child's first one on the list, and I'm just like wanting to crawl under the table. And, I talked to him afterwards and I was like, you can't, like, could you just like take the numbers off or, my name off before we do that? And he's like, who would doubt you were the first one on the list? Right. He was just like so sincere, but those things were more awkward than me ever feeling like I didn't have an opportunity to succeed when I did well.
You mentioned, it reminds me though, what you're really talking about in many cases is unconscious bias.
Mm.
It's funny, and it's a challenge. Have you I know that a lot of organizations have done training on this now to try to help people see that we all have them, right?
Mhm.
Like you
100%.
just said, well-meaning,
Mhm.
not, but you don't realize how they can affect others.
Mhm.
Um, how about yourself? What do you know about yourself that you try to have to keep a handle on? If it's a fair question to ask you, what are your
Mhm.
unconscious biases, if you will?
That's a really great question.
I know I didn't warn you I was going to ask beforehand,
I
so
know. I know.
it
Um,
made me think about it with your examples. Um, yeah, I'll share one anecdote maybe while you're thinking there.
mhm.
I was teaching a class one time, um, of operational managers, and there were 9 men in the room and one woman. Okay,
Mhm.
and I tended to use the word guys in a generic format,
Mhm.
and I was trying to be really like, I'm aware that there's a woman in the room, and so I say, I just want you to know I use the word guys and I mean it generically. So I hope you're not offended. And so she's sitting there and she goes, "Why did you call me out? Why did you say that publicly?"
Mhm.
Okay. I knew that. You didn't have to say anything in front of all the other guys. And I was, at that moment, I realized that, it's not what I think, it's what the other person, how they receive it, that's key. And I've got to be much more thinking about how they might receive what I have to say rather than what I want to say to the group.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, guys for me is a generic term. And I was the same way. If someone was like, there were so many times what people would be like, okay, guys, and I mean that, and I'm like, I know you mean it in the generic sense. Like, quit like bringing it up. I think for me, some unconscious biases that I have are not really related to these, identity groups or categories of diversity. I think that sometimes in my career, I put people in positions because they were successful in another area. And my conscious bias was, if you can do engineering, you can do manufacturing, and really underestimating that people can adapt to that environment readily. So, so I think that I had this tendency to look at success and feel like it was transferable everywhere, and not necessarily give as much scrutiny and support to um, the skill sets that would be needed. So I don't,
That's fair.
necessarily think in terms of the diversity pieces of it, although I'm sure I do have some of that.
Well, no, but you're hitting it on the head. I mean, unconscious bias isn't exclusive for diversity, right? It's just where we have those preconceived notions that maybe we don't always realize we have. Yeah.
Mhm.
I wanted to touch on one thing as well, just to go from here. You mentioned earlier that you had this epiphany that really kind of changed I think your whole life here, where you really bet on yourself, said that I can't rely on anyone else or any other organization to just, push me through life. I had
Mhm.
to become the best version of myself and keep learning.
Mhm.
If, to everyone listening today as well, what would you say are, looking back at yourself then, are like the top key things that you would tell them to sort of hop on that same wagon, the same thought leadership, I'd say.
Yeah, I think honestly, there's different forces in life, and if you're not growing, you're regressing. And it doesn't have to be in a professional sense. So for me, I went and got an MBA, and then I worked for, we'll call it a couple decades, and then, went and got my master's in applied positive psychology. And I have this new sense of energy, right? Because I have this whole new body of knowledge and experience that I can help other people grow. And so I think it is really important. I think it's important that we raise our children to be self sufficient and not depend on us too much, right? And teach them that, hey, even if I could afford to buy you this car, I'm not going to, because you need to earn some things yourself. And that's no offense to anybody who can't afford and did that. But I think it's so, so important to model that for the next generations. Even my dad, when I said, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to go back to school," he was like, what are you going to do with this, at this stage of your career? And I said, I don't know, Dad, but the first couple of decades I did it your way, and I'm going to do it my way this time. So, whether we're whole people, right? The learning doesn't have to be at work. It can be outside. It can be in a hobby. It can be all those things. But I do think if you're not growing, that you are indeed dying. And so I think that's really important.
And I 100% agree with that. And looking into the 2022 and beyond, what do you think are some new skills that manufacturing professionals could acquire that weren't needed 20 to 30 years ago?
Yeah, I think people still need to work on leadership and understand the principles of inclusive environments. There's still a lot of command and control in manufacturing environments that I think people should, continue to work on. And I also think that for this up and coming generation, getting some of those technical skills, and it doesn't have to be in a degree form, right? There's many certificates out there for trades, and all of those skills are going to be necessary. So if you love the technology area, go out and get skills in that area because they're going to be needed. And if you're already in manufacturing, be open to learning new things and trying new things and trying to contribute in a new way. And if you're a leader, study that psychology, right, of organizational development, because there's so much to be had by engaging your workforce. And I don't mean that in a buzzword sort of way. I mean by truly seeing people for their strengths and their gifts and utilizing them to help make businesses more competitive.
I couldn't agree more. It's the people, like we have to always remember that the people drive the plant, and if their needs are not met, they don't feel wanted and needed, and the leadership style is not, progressive, then you're going to lose this talent to someone else, and really it will hit you hard, believe me. So like you're saying, growing people from within, just like in sports, they, the draftees, I think they'll feel, obviously in debt to you forever as well for this, like you said, for this sort of, the time and energy you put into developing someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people need to feel valued. I think that's an important lesson that's coming out of this great resignation. People aren't willing just to be pawns anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want meaningful work, and they want to contribute, and they want to work for people who value them and their talents and gifts.
Yeah. Well, we're reaching close to the end of the hour, so I really wanted to thank you, Kathy, for spending this time with us and really kind of sharing, from the beginning of your career, your experience in manufacturing, and even your latest adventures. So remind me the title of the book that you've written.
It is called, I happen to have a copy right here, Mike.
There you go. Thank you.
Stilettos and Stilettos, a true story of women manufacturing leaders and lean transformation success.
No, that's great. So do you have any last words for the audience, Kathy, you'd like to share before we wrap up our time together?
Yeah, well, I hope you'll check out OPSisters at OPSisters.com. I hope you'll check out the book, but I really hope that you will continue to grow and think about manufacturing as a career. It's an amazing place to be able to add value and contribute to the needs of mankind.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Daniel, thank you as well. Do you have anything you'd like to share before we
I just want to
finish up?
share that Kathy is the mindset that everyone needs to take on for sure. And really, I think that everyone should be listening again to this fireside chat and be people centric always. We're only human, right? And it's very important that everyone's needs are met within these organizations that really focus on dollar per the minute, by the minute, dollar by the hour. That needs to change.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Kathy. So just to conclude, this has been the Industry 4.0 Club. We've been really fortunate to speak with Kathy Miller today as part of our weekly fireside chat that we host on Wednesdays, typically from 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The Industry 4.0 Club also hosts rooms on Monday, Women in Manufacturing, starting at 12:30 Eastern. Tuesdays, we focus on the future of manufacturing on a technical topic related to Industry 4.0. That again is at 12:30 p.m. And on Thursdays, we talk about people, process, and culture. That's also at 12:30 p.m. Sometimes we're on Clubhouse. Sometimes you'll find us on LinkedIn Live. You can check out all of our events at the industry4.0club.com and on our LinkedIn page as well. So again, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Daniel. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the day and the rest of the week.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks so much.
Daniel.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.